I want to thank you because you know what? In the middle of this interchange, you got me into the feeling as if I was talking to my father-in-law.
And my hope is that the people watching this are going to also feel like they were able to spend some time with him.
You got me in that state of mind that I wasn't there for a long time. Through the
Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem. Rabbi Cohen, you graciously agreed to meet me here because I'll give the background here. This book came into my house a week or two ago. I got very excited. This is a new book in English about Reb Volf Greenglass, Horav Reb Menachem Ze'ev Halevi Greenglass. I got very excited when I saw this book. And then I saw that you were the author of it. And we've known each other for some time. And we were in touch. And I said, could we sit down and talk about this and give people a taste of Rabbi Greenglass's personality, his life, his influence. And here we are.
With pleasure.
And we should mention also that you are Rabbi Greenglass's son-in-law.
Yes, only son-in-law.
Only son-in-law. And you had a front seat to many of the stories.
Oh, yes.
So you're the authority on this subject. Okay.
By the way, any mashpia that will tell stories, you'll notice if you hear a lot of his Farbrengings, he'll repeat those stories again and again, because those are the stories that he lived with.
Okay, so since you say that, I have an agenda of things that I'm very interested to ask, but since you brought that up, now you piqued my curiosity. I don't know if you're ready for this, but if you were to answer, your Shver's go-to, if you had to pick his go-to story, like a cornerstone story that just through the years you heard again and again.
Again and again.
Yeah, is there a story that's like?
Well, there's a few of them, but
okay.
The one that comes to mind is the story of Rebbe and Rivka.
Okay.
After the
passing
wife
of the Rebbe Marash.
Correct. The wife of the Rebbe Marash. After the passing of the Rebbe Marash, Rebbe and Rivka received a letter. And the Rebbe Rashab came into the room and saw Rebbe and Rivka crying. So the Rebbe Rashab politely asked, Ma, why are you crying? And Rebbe Rivka wouldn't answer. So the Rebbe Rashab paused a little bit, and then he asked again, Ma, why are you crying? Until it came to a point, I don't know exactly how the Rebbe Rashab said it, because I don't want to say that the Rebbe Rashab was disrespectful to his mother, but he says, Ma, when my father passed away, you didn't cry like this. So why are you crying now more than on the passing of the Rebbe Marash? And then came a beautiful answer from Rebbe and Rivka, which teaches us why all the moistus of Chabad are called Beis Rivka, and gives us an idea.
We should mention also that your Shver was involved in establishing
Beis Rivka in Montreal, correct.
Yeah.
And shows us a little bit of the stature of the Rebbetzins of Chabad. So Rebbetzin Rivka answers, your cousins in Vitebsk, the girls of Reb Salman Aaron.
I mean, the Rebbe Rashab's nieces.
Nieces, right.
Right.
The Reb Salman Aaron was the brother of
Rashab's
Reb
older
Rashab.
brother.
Correct.
So, okay.
So your nieces, watch this, they're dressing tzniazdik. They're tzniazdik, but they're following a little bit of the non-Jewish fashion. In other words, it's not that they're not tzniazdik, but it's following non-Jewish fashion.
A little bit stylish.
That's it. Going a little bit following the style.
Mm-hmm.
So the Rebbe Rashab says, so for that you're crying?
Mm-hmm.
So she would answer, and this is what Rabbi Greenglass would mention all the time, and he would repeat it again and again to the Bochurim. When your father passed away, that was Ratzon Ha'elyon. The way these girls are dressing is not Ratzon Ha'elyon. Ratzon Ha'elyon meaning the divine will of Hashem for a Jew on this world. So in other words, what is the barometer, what is the code that a person should always have in his life is what I'm doing the will of Hashem.
It's interesting that you're mentioning this was a favorite story of his, because mean, I'm hearing the story, and it strikes me there's this sort of contrast that things that are within our free will, that's what you should be happy or sad about because you can actually do something about it. And then things that are Ratzon Elyon, where it's Hashem is the one deciding, then, that's Hashem's will, and you just sort of accept it or live with it. I'm not sure this is what you're getting at, but I think it would be helpful because I did want to get into a biography, a little bit of the story and the life of Rabbi Greenglass. But I mean, he experienced, let's just talk about in his childhood and his youth, he experienced a great deal of loss and upheaval and turmoil. And yet he was known as having an incredibly upbeat personality and being besimcha and spreading simcha.
Joking
and using that as part of his educational method. Can we talk a little bit about like all that he endured as far as, trials and tribulations, because he had an he was born, I think, right at the time of World War I, and he was born in Poland, and Poland just became an independent country. And then there was World War II and the Germans invading. And just in the first 22 years of his life, there's a lot of world history and a lot of upheaval. Can we just give a little background about what he went through in his youth?
Sure. So when he was young, he went to an Alexander yeshiva. He was from Alexander Chassidim. And in his teenage years, he once stepped into the Lubavitcher quarters and saw Rabbi Moshe Eli Gerlitzky davening Maariv. And when he saw him davening Maariv, he said, that Maariv, I have never seen ever a chassid daven like that.
It was another bacher.
It was another bacher davening Maariv. Right. Well, he was an excellent bacher.
But I'm saying it wasn't a venerable old chassid with
no, a young bacher davening Maariv.
Colleague. And later on, they became
very close friends.
Close, and they both lived in Montreal together.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
And from that Maariv, he says, I want to go to the yeshiva who produces such a bacher that davens Maariv like that.
Okay.
And as a matter of fact, he said that story publicly at my engagement. And Rabbi Gerlitzky did not know and stood up, went over to him and hugged him.
Wow.
That was very nice. I remember that.
I guess Rabbi Gerlitzky was busy davening. He didn't
That's
know
right.
anyone was watching. You see the effect that you can have on somebody you don't even realize. Okay.
So then he moved to Chabad, and then in the yeshiva.
And at that time, the Frierdiker Rebbe was in Atvatsk.
Yes.
The Frierdiker Rebbe had left the Soviet Union.
Correct.
So Yeshver went to Atvatsk.
Correct.
Okay.
And there at Atvatsk, he learned and many beautiful stories from Atvatsk. And then when the war broke out, then he asked the Rebbe whether he should go back home because they called him to the army to be drafted.
Okay, so this is in 1939.
Right.
And the Rebbe came into Poland.
And the Frierdiker Rebbe said, don't go back home and don't get drafted. So he wrote back to his parents, I'm not coming back home. The Rebbe said, no. So the parents said, but do you know that whoever gets drafted and doesn't come is fatal?
Right.
So he said, I'm doing what the Rebbe said. The Rebbe said, and luckily that he didn't go back home because everybody that went and was drafted went on the front line, and the front line was everybody wiped out. And sure enough, from then on, he moved his way through Russia to get to Shanghai.
Okay, but you're getting all the way to Shanghai, but there are a few steps.
Oh, there's so many stories on the way that the SS caught them. And
I mean, initially, I think they went to Vilna. And
they went to Vilna. They opened up a
Sugihari visa, yeah?
Sugihari visa. And so many stories. On the way, the SS brought them into their barracks, and they undressed them, and they showed us, they said, put on your tefillin without any clothes, and they were roughing them up, and they put somebody upside down in water. And then there was a train track where you fill up the water of the railroad trains, and it's a big tank. So they put one of the boys, I think it was Rodell's. I think it was Yossela Rodell, one of the nine shluchim. They put him under this water reservoir that fills up the train track. And he said, that the water, when it came down, he couldn't breathe. It's like you're inside water because there's so much water at a time.
Right.
And so much water, and he couldn't breathe. And time is going on, and he couldn't breathe. Until finally, when the water stopped, he fell on the floor, and he was unconscious for a little while until they reanimated him. And they went through once to make fun of them. It was before the vicious SS, but it was still malintended soldiers. They would say, "Okay, guys, start running and go back home." And they would shoot at them as if they would be a game, like hunting. And he said he felt the bullet, the sizzle of the bullet right next to his ear. Like he had constant miracles. Once when he was in the forest and he was traveling to get to a point where somebody would be making him cross the border.
Which border is this?
From Poland to Russia.
Poland to Russia.
So he said that they were not supposed to go together, that they shouldn't be caught together. And he was afraid of wolves because they said wolves are in the forest. So they told him, take matches. And with the matches, you put it on, they'll run away. And he said he was saying Tanya the whole way as a protection. And the way he said that he was saying Tanya in Yiddish was, Ich habe gesegnet Tanya. The zegem is like a saw. So he was saying the words of Tanya. He said he'll never forget the enthusiasm and the energy that he put into that chazring Tanya by heart until he reached the goy's house that was supposed to take him to
past the border.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So eventually, and obviously, I should mention that all of these details are in the book, but we're gonna, we're just giving a taste. Okay. Eventually, they make it to Japan with a Sugihara visa, and they were in Japan for a time, and then they ended up in Shanghai, and that's where they spent the war. Now, I mean, just that itself is a book. But
yes,
if you can give like a taste of that, what life was like in Shanghai, trying to set up a yeshiva and trying to learn. And while there was the war going on, there was poverty, there was literal starvation.
Poverty, and also the weather was very hot. He said it sometimes reached 110 and 115 degrees. They were walking around in pajamas. You couldn't wear any clothing. They didn't have a cook, so each day somebody else cooked. I don't want to mention the name, but one of the Bochurim was a little bit clumsy, and when he made rice, he thought that you're supposed to fill up the rice like you fill up the pot with water. So what happened was they came back in the kitchen, and the kitchen was full of rice because it overflowed all over the oven.
Right.
So until they
he didn't know the proportions. Right. The rice soaks up the water.
You can understand Bochurim cooking, and then they say Rabbi Yitzchak Cohen Handel was
Rav. Yeah.
He was a good cook.
Oh.
He knew how to cook, and he knew how to learn. He just knew it all.
Hashem. Okay. So eventually they make it out of Shanghai. We're skipping so much because there was so much that they went through, literally life-threatening circumstances. But the war ends and they can't get into the United States. By they, I'm talking about we're talking about 9 shluchim. And these were the older Bochurim? Was that how it was?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And they got visas to Canada.
Right, because they couldn't get visas to America because they were afraid they might be spies.
Wow. Okay. So they get to
San Francisco. They got a train straight to Canada.
Or Vancouver.
Yes, and they actually had FBI spies go with them.
To make sure they're not spies.
They said that they were people that didn't look like traveling people. They looked like spies.
Right.
I don't believe
agents.
Right. They were FBI agents going with them.
Right. Okay. So then they have to go all the way across Canada and they get to Montreal. Now there's a story apparently that when they got to Montreal, I guess you would say the most prestigious member of the community from the famous Seagram liquor company, Rothman, gave them an interesting welcome.
Yes.
What did he tell them?
He said to them, when they heard that they want to open a yeshiva, that here you could forget about opening a yeshiva. Here, the people are modern. Here is not the European lifestyle of religious Jews, if you want, I'll give you $5,000, open your yeshiva in Toronto. $5,000 then.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah. I mean, even now, today, $5,000 is not a little bit amount of money. But then, and they said, no, the Frierdiker Rebbe said, we're opening a yeshiva here and we're opening it tomorrow.
Okay, so also let's talk about that. That these are refugees who've just, many of them lost their families. They're coming to a new country. They don't speak the language. They've experienced starvation, and they're welcomed, however you want to call welcomed. And then they immediately announce, we're starting a yeshiva. Right? They literally, the yeshiva started the next morning.
Correct. In the synagogue of the Nusachari on Pine Avenue. And what's interesting is the Frierdiker Rebbe would be in constant correspondence with them and communicated with them. And he would even send Reb Shmuel Levitin to visit them from time to time. And it's interesting that the Frierdiker Rebbe actually gave them directions how to spend their Shabbos table, because there's 9 shluchim alone.
You once told me this, and I actually try to implement this at my family Shabbos table. They were Bochurim. They lost their families.
They had nobody.
They had no. So the Frierdiker Rebbe was guiding them. This is what a Shabbos table is. And if you think about it, they didn't know those things we take for granted.
Yeah. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, you have to chazer a raid. What we call today a sicha,
right?
The Frierdiker Rebbe called it a raid. A raid means a discourse.
Right, some Torah words.
Torah words that were mentioned by the Rebbe. So you chazer a raid and 3 Chasidus Nigunim.
So that's very interesting, the proportion.
Yeah.
Because you would think maybe 1 nigun and then, a few divrei Torah.
Well, don't forget, it's a Shabbos table. It's a meal. It's not a classroom.
So it's 1 Dvar Torah based on the Rebbe's
Sichos,
right,
which we call Sichos today.
And 3 nigun.
3 Chasidus Nigunim.
It's just fascinating. And also, I want to get back to the timeline. I don't want to lose the story.
Right.
Here, but your Shver was very, very into, and he was sort of like someone who preserved a lot of the hanhagas, a lot of the conduct, and what are the customs of Lubavitch. He was very into like Minhagim, day-to-day.
Well, he edited the Sefer Minhagim Chabad together with Rabbi Leibel Groner.
A lot of people do not know that.
Right.
This is the famous Sefer Minhagim. Yeah.
Right. And the Rebbe asked Rabbi Greenglass to collect all the Minhagim and to write down things that he saw by Chassidim.
What's interesting to me about that is, as you mentioned earlier, that he grew up, his parents were Alexander Chassidim. In Poland, I think Ger and Alexander were the 2 big groups. And so he only came to Lubavitch later. Like you mentioned, he was a Bacher already, and he saw Rebbe Gerlitzky, and he was very attracted to that. So it's so interesting, somebody who didn't start off Chabad, but he became very much an authority, or perhaps even the authority among Chassidim of Chabad customs.
Yes. Yeah. He also researched a lot. He told me before the Sefer Minhagim came out, he would stay up nights to put it together. Research, because he was also working during the day in yeshiva.
Let's talk about a little bit about his work in yeshiva. Because, okay, so you mentioned that the morning after they were welcomed, they established the yeshiva. The yeshiva was open for business. Okay. So who was the original Hanhala? Who were the staff?
The staff, I believe, was Rabbi Leibel Kramer, and the principal was Rabbi Yosel Rudl. The Rosh Yeshiva was Rabbi Yitzchak HaKohen Handel.
Who you mentioned earlier was
Rosh Yeshiva. But he was a great Rosh Yeshiva.
Yeah.
He was my Rosh Yeshiva in Yeshiva. And by the way, Rabbi Handel, to mention, Rabbi Greenglass told me that the way Rabbi Handel mastered his halacha is, as a bacher, he would have a shiur in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch from midnight to 2 a.m. in the morning. Teenagers have a lot of energy and they stay up at night. Well, guess what? If you channel it well, you could be a Rav in halacha. And that's exactly what Rabbi Handel did. He learned when teenagers can't fall asleep, instead of, I don't know what the idle occupation they could do, Rabbi Handel
was
channeled that extra energy of a teenager into learning halacha 2 hours a night after his whole day of learning.
Right. On his own.
And that's how he became Baki in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Whenever we asked him a question, he said, bring me a Shulchan Aruch, and he would like to show the source.
So Rabbi Handel, who was the Rav, was originally the Rosh Yeshiva.
Rosh Yeshiva and Rav. He did it simultaneously.
Okay. We should mention also, maybe you can help me to exactly understand the details here. Rabbi Hirschprung.
Yes.
Who also was the Rosh Yeshiva in the yeshiva.
Correct, but he was the Rav Rashi of the whole city.
Of the entire city.
And he came in a few times a week to teach the Bochurim.
Was he also, when they traveled over?
Yes.
Okay, what's exactly the story?
He was in Shanghai, and he would call my father-in-law and Rabbi Handel my Schiff Bride.
Schiff Bride, yeah.
Which means my
boat brothers.
My boat brothers. I don't know if there's such a term, but he made the term because they had no family. The only family was the brother that was with him on the ship. Rabbi Hirschprung was a Gaon Elam. He knew the whole. If you found him a little piece of Gemara and showed it to him, he would tell you which Gemara and which daf it was and where it was.
And just last week, I was talking to somebody who grew up in Montreal, and he said that he remembers as a kid seeing Rabbi Hirschprung do the Pinchas test.
Yeah.
And not really understanding how unique that was. You know, that you could put a pin in any page and he could tell you where that pin was touching on any other page in that volume.
Rabbi Hirschprung would invite us.
Meaning he had a photographic memory.
Oh, yes.
Knew the entire Talmud, not just the words, but visualization on the page.
Rabbi Hirschprung would give us in the winter when it was long nights, Matzah Shabbos, a Shiur and Mishnayos. And he would say of the Gemara Baba Metzia, which he took that example because he knew Lubavitch is also doing outreach work. He would say, two people run for a talis, and they both grab it, and we don't know who grabbed it first. So, this one says, I found it. This one says, I found it. So they both have to swear that they don't have less than half. And then they cut it in half. So he said, this is a very nice Mishnah that has to do with the outreach work of Lubavitch. Okay. So what? He says, many people are involved in bringing someone closer to Judaism. So this one says, I gave him a class during the week in Tanya. And this one said, I invited him for Shabbos in my house. He's my Baal Tshuva. No, he's my Baal Tshuva. I don't have, so each one swears they don't have less than half, and then they could share the merit equally half-half.
That's beautiful.
He says that's how they learn the Mishnah in Gan Eden.
Okay, so let's talk about this yeshiva, because we didn't mention, and who was the original mashpia when they first? So what year would that have been when they first came over?
Tavshin Beis is when they arrived.
So 1942.
That's when they arrived in Canada and opened the yeshiva in Montreal. And the actually building of the yeshiva was because they started first in a synagogue, in a shul.
Right.
And then they moved to Park Avenue a few years later. Okay. And then they finally built the building that we have today on Westbury.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about Rabbi Greenglass as an educator.
Yes.
His relationship with the Bochurim. Of course, you were one of his students.
Yes.
And then later became a son-in-law.
He had a very beautiful approach to students. He would never, ever bring out their fault. And if he had to make some kind of reprimand, he would do it in a funny, enjoyable, nice way. For example, he saw that a boy, from the way he woke up, he went straight to yeshiva to daven, and he didn't go to the mikveh. And he saw that there just wasn't the time for him to go to the mikveh. So he didn't go over to him and say, why didn't you go to the mikveh today? Right. But he would say, tell me, how was the mikveh today? Was it hot or cold? And then he didn't wait for the answer, right, but he moved on to something else.
Right.
So what did he do? He brought him aware,
right?
But he didn't embarrass him.
Floated it out there. Yeah. There's so many stories about his style of subtlety.
Yes.
Just the faintest hint.
And move on. Because he believed that a boy you have to build. You never knock him down. You knock him down, you could lose him. A boy would come over to him and say, Rebbe, I messed up. I did this, and I did this, I did that. So he would squint his eyes. He would nod his head like to say, sort of say, it's all right, move on. He would give the example. If a person walks on the street and he slips, so you have two options. You could sit down and cry, or you could get up and move on. Mm-hmm. So Rabbi Greenglass would say, what are you going to do? You're going to sit down and cry? Get up and move on. And then if somebody said, I did this, I messed up and this and that. So he would say to him, darkness, you don't take a broom and broom it out. Darkness, you bring a candle and you light the candle. He said, okay, so what's a candle? How do you light a candle? He says, this Shabbos coming up, I want you to know this mimer by heart. Rabbi Greenglass, I don't know how to chazer by heart. I can't chazer by heart. It's impossible for me. I don't have the head.
Right. You're talking about repeating an entire mimer.
Tells him, come sit right next to me. Open the book. Open the mimer. Say the first line. Say it again. Say it again. Say it again. 3-4 times. Close the sefer. Now say it your own. He said, yeah, but that's just one line. I said, say one line. Say, now do the next line. Next line. He said, Me'at mina deche harbe mina choshech. Kol shken harbe mina deche harbe mina choshech. If a little bit of light pushes a lot of darkness, so for sure, a lot of light will push away a lot of darkness. Learn the mimer by heart this Shabbos. And if you can't, do one sif. And if you can't, keep the sefer open. But you're saying the mimer, Rabbi Greenglass, you're putting pressure on me. So he says, I'm not. I'm making it easy for you. I'm telling you could hold the sefer open. But invest the time. Get up early in your morning when your mind is fresh and do it. And the Bacher did it. And later on, I meet the Bacher and I meet the Shluchim, and they told me, your father-in-law pushed me to do a mimer, and that's the mimer that set the tone and set me for my whole life, that I believed in myself, that I could do things that I thought I would never do.
Wow.
So he gave the Bochurim that self-confidence that they didn't know they had. I don't want to mention names because I don't want to, but big shluchim today that are running cities tell me that the mimer they did on Shabbos set the tone for their life. What does a mimer do? Oisius, Rabbi Greenglass would say, Oisius is like it says in Avonim, it's kalim. The letters of Torah, the letters of Chasidus are recipients. And they are mamshich oyer. They allow light to come in. So don't work with the broom and the darkness. Bring in the light. By the way, besides the great advantage of these kashrus with the Rebbe and these kashrus with the Torah, I'm talking just practically. It sets the Bacher straight. And of course, all the benefits of being connected with the Rebbe and be connected with Torah and having Torah in your mind and having what to think about when you're on the street. I mean, that's all the pluses. But the main thing is that it gives the Bacher, Rabbi Greenglass would want every Bacher to have a library of Maimarim that he could pick on.
That he would have in his head.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's talk about also his style of teaching, his shiur.
Yes. His teaching was very, very much saying the words, translating, and making sure they understood the pshat, pausing, giving a little nuance on it that you may not have caught from the translation, and adding a story. We were learning the mimer in the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimarim of Tafshin. And in those Maimarim, there was a mimer called Amayich Be'echod. There was a mimer of Az Yashir. And in the mimer of Az Yashir, which talks about the opening of the Red Sea, Rabbi Greenglass would stop and say, everybody thinks that in the opening of the Red Sea, then what was wet became dry. And then you had all the openings that were hidden now became revealed. So he said something that was not in the mimer, which I remember, that in Chasidus, there's two ways to count the spheres. Okay. There's Mimayla Lemata Chochma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvur, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus. And then there's the way how to count them in a segel, which means Chochma, Bina, Das.
Right.
Like a funny face. No, like
three axes, right, left, center.
And the center a little lower.
Right.
And then Chesed, Gvur, Tiferet.
Right.
And then Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. And then Malchus. So when Malchus opened up, so he started saying, so what opens up on top of Malchus is Yesod. So Yesod opens up. What opens up on top of Yesod is Tiferes. Tiferes opens up.
Right.
What opens up on top of Tiferes is Das. What opens up on top of Das is Keser.
Okay.
And then the same three and opening up go until the Malchus Lifnei Tzimtzum.
Okay. This is very deep concepts over here.
But but we're talking about, we're just opening the Red Sea. But he showed us how opening the Red Sea went all the way up to Malchus Lifnei Tzimtzum. That was not in the Maimar.
Right.
But I remember that so well because it affected me. It gave me a new way to look at Kriyas Yamsuf.
We should mention, you're saying his style of shiur was grounded in basic pshat, understanding the simple
translation of words and well pronouncing the word.
This example you're giving, though, where he was drawing on deeper Kabbalistic concepts, so we should mention that the Rebbe referred to him
my Mekubal.
Yeah, not just as a Mekubal.
It's documented. There's an audio tape of it.
Yeah, and apparently he wasn't so open about that.
No, he hated when people told him. But he says, nah, the Rebbe was just making a little pleasant joke about me.
But the reality was that he was involved.
There was something going on.
Kabbalah.
I know for a fact he was communicating with people, Mekubalim in Eretz Yisrael. I saw correspondence and arguing about. Okay, you ready for this one? The Seder plate. Some have the matzahs on the bottom, and some have the matzahs on the top. So we have the matzahs on the bottom and the Seder on top. So in Kabbalah, there's the two opinions, and we follow the ones that the matzahs are on the bottom. What it really is involving, the whole machlekes, is what is stronger, Chabad or Chagas, Seichel, intellect, or emotions. Those that say that intellect is stronger than emotions put the matzahs on top, matzahs chochma bina das, and the 6 emotions on the bottom. We hold that the emotions are higher than the intellect, so the intellect is on the bottom, chochma bina das, and the 6 on top is the emotions. So, watch this. Why does Chabad hold? And that was what I got from the letter that my father-in-law answered the Mekubal in Israel. It says, Leis machshava tvise beklal. With seichel, you can't get the Eibishter. I shouldn't say get. You can't understand.
Right.
It's unfathomable. It's beyond intellect. Avol ihu tvisa berusa deliba. But with emotions, you could grab him. You could feel him. You could have it. So where does the emotions go? On top of the seichel. That's why our kaira has the emotions on top.
Even though mayach shalat al-alev.
Mayach shalat al-alev is practically when you have to do something. But theoretically, in value, you will do something because you're emotionally involved. You will not necessarily do something because you think it's right. And the proof to that is that you'll have driver's ed tell his students, don't speed. And when he goes home, he's going to speed. The doctor's going to tell his patient, don't smoke. And when he goes out of the room, he'll smoke. Because intellect will not necessarily change you. But when you're emotionally attached to what you believe in, the emotions will then be able to form your action. What we have to do is that machshava, dibur, and maaseh, that the intellect has to affect the dibur, which is the emotions expression, until the action itself. And that's what you were saying about mayach shalit al-alev. That's what we have to work on.
Okay, so I asked you said that the stories when he would teach Chasidus was like a highlight.
Oh, yes.
Let's do another story that came up in learning or at a Farbrenging.
A story that he would love to repeat is about Avraham Avinu. When it says by Avraham Avinu that he went to Shecht Yitzchak, so it says, Vayishlach Avraham es yodei. So I ask you, when you have to Shecht, do you have to summon your hand, send your hand? You stretch out your hand.
Right. Yishlach means he sent.
So what's going on over here?
Yeah.
Why does it have to say, it's almost like the hand didn't want to go? Why not?
Yeah.
So Rabbi Greenglass would explain when he would touch on the subject of the others, that Hein Amarkova, that the others were chariots of the celestial will, which means that just like a chariot cannot go on its own anywhere, but it only goes wherever the driver goes. So the bodies of the others were so trained that everything they did was the will of Hashem Ratzon Elyon. So now we have a problem because the body is told Shecht Yitzchak, but the body has its own mind, quote unquote. The body knows that God doesn't want that Yitzchak should be shechted.
Because it's a markov, because it's not just any body, it's the body of
Avraham. So now Avraham tells his body, okay, guy, let's shecht. And the body said, no, I'm not shechting.
This is not the divine.
Yitzchak is not supposed to be shechted. What do you mean? I'm telling you shecht. So vayishlach Avraham es yodei. So Avraham had to force his hand to go.
Wow. That's great.
Isn't that nice?
Fascinating.
But you know what it teaches a bocher? That our bodies could become like Avraham Avinu. There's a Vort he used to repeat. Everybody should say, let my actions be like the ones of the forefathers, our patriarchs.
And the Rebbe brings it in
many times.
Yeah.
So, hold on a minute. The others were way up there. How do you say I'm going to be like them? So my father-in-law would say, my side, your actions could be like that. I don't know if your Ahava and Yira would be like the one of Avraham Yitzchak. He gave it to you. Ahava Mesuter, so you got to reveal it. But at least your actions could start following what Avraham Yitzchak.
Which is the concept of Tanya, which is the Beinani focuses on
action.
Correct. Let's talk a little bit specifically about Tanya.
Okay, Tanya, there's so much to talk about.
Give us a taste of Yeshver's
Tanya. When somebody came into the Shiur of Tanya, the first thing he said was, let's look at the word Tanya. It starts with the letter Tov, and it finishes with the letter Aleph. So when you come in to learn Tanya, you think you know everything. You're holding by the letter Tov. Right. When you finish learning Tanya, you're holding by the letter Aleph. You realize you just started.
That's great.
It says the Mittel Rebbe once showed the Tanya that the Alter Rebbe wrote, and as he was reading the Tanya, so the Alter Rebbe says, wow, I see things here that I did not see in Mizrich by the Mizrich Magid. Mm-hmm. And here the Mittel Rebbe was
the Alter Rebbe himself who wrote the Tanya.
The Alter Rebbe himself who wrote the Tanya is seeing things in Tanya that he didn't see. Which means that the Torah is so infinite and Ein Sof that at one point, when you touch the Ein Sof of the Tanya, you could be the author of the Tanya. Yet, you could come back and see in it the infinity of it.
You have to unpack it, I guess.
Which shows us how the world is so full of layers. And a chassid has to be, I don't know which description to say, wise, smart, cunning, deep. He should not stop at the first layer.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the stories between your Shver and the Rebbe, because there's
so
a particularly a story. I mean, maybe this is not the first story you want to tell, but I heard a story. Rabbi Mangel, who was very close with your Shver. I think he lived in his house.
Yeah, for 10 years.
A Bacher came over. He was a Holocaust survivor, and he lived with him in his house. Okay. So I heard Rabbi Mangel tell this story about when your Shver he called Maskiris, he called Rabbi Chadukov, about his wife was in the hospital.
Oh, there's many. That's already when.
This is a later story.
Later story. There's a story how they bought the house.
Oh, okay. Why don't you tell
I'll tell you the story about how they bought the house and how.
Okay.
So
the house story was before the Nesias, meaning it was before the Rebbe
became Rebbe. It's in the time of the Frierdiker Rebbe.
Okay, so this is in the 40s.
Right.
Okay.
So there was no house to be found, and he was looking for a house to move into.
Okay.
They finally found a house, and when they found the house, the man says, okay, or you're taking it, or I'm giving it to someone else. So he says, I don't do anything without asking the Rebbe. And they wanted also key money. It's like a bonus that the landlord gets regardless of what the rent will be.
Wait, this is a rental or they were buying?
Renting.
There was a certain amount of money.
And you had to prepare the money. So he has to prepare the money, he has to go, and other people are waiting in line. If he doesn't get it, guess what? He loses it. And they're all looking, it's after the war, there's no apartment.
Right.
So he was close with the Rebbe, with our Rebbe, and he calls him directly and says, could you please go into the Frierdiker Rebbe, get me a bracha, I want the apartment. So
he called the Rebbe on the phone.
Yes. So the Rebbe answers, now watch this, because whoever knows the Rebbe's principles, the Rebbe never backs down on his principles. And for my father-in-law, he did. Watch this. He goes over to the Rebbe and he says, could you please go in? The Rebbe answers like this. I go into the Rebbe, to the Frierdiker Rebbe, once a day.
Okay.
And today I went in already.
Right. So your request will have to be tomorrow.
I can't help you.
Yeah.
But 20 minutes later, he gets a call from the Rebbe. I went into the Rebbe, I asked him for a bracha, and the Rebbe answered, may this home not only be a home, will there be achila v'shtia for those that are coming from overseas and that are fugitives and are the newcomers from Europe, and achila v'shtia begashmias, it should also be achila v'shtia beruchnias, a place of Farbrenging. So my father-in-law was so happy, and he says, thank you so much. But 1 minute. Didn't you say
you can't go in again?
You're not going in again.
Yeah.
He says, the Rebbe says like this, I was walking on Eastern Parkway and I was on the way home and I imagined the tsar that you're going through. I turned around and I went in and asked the Rebbe.
Amazing story. Okay. Can you tell us the story now about the baby?
Okay. So this is when my brother-in-law was born. So what happened?
Approximately what year would this be?
About 68 years ago. He's 60. Actually, no, he just turned 70 years ago.
Okay.
He just turned 70 years ago.
So 1954.
So around that time,
now this is after the Rebbe became Rebbe.
Now this is the time that the Rebbe is Rebbe. So my mother-in-law had a lot of complications. And the doctor says we have to abort the baby. And if you don't abort the baby, not only will for sure the baby not make it, but the mother, chas v'sholom, might not make it too. So Rabbi Greenglass answered, listen, I don't do anything without the Rebbe. I have to ask the Rebbe. So the doctor said, what do you mean? What is the Rebbe in Brooklyn going to know about what to do about a mother and a baby here in the Royal Victoria Hospital of Montreal? So she said, no, we don't do anything without asking the Rebbe. Okay, asked the Rebbe answered, tell the doctor to do everything in his possibility to save the mother and the baby together and not to abort. So he said that. He says, I told you I did, I can't.
Right.
No. Anyway, this is before Shabbos. And finally, in the middle of the night, there was a lot of complications, and the doctor listened to Rabbi Greenglass, and they did the impossible, and they saved the mother and the baby was born. So afterwards, after the baby was born, Rabbi Greenglass called the Rebbe and told them
the good news.
The good news. Rabbi Chadakov asks Rabbi Greenglass, could you please tell us what time it happened?
Now, at this point, because you told a story where Yeshver was able to call the Rebbe directly.
Yeah, no, at this point,
they went there. After the Nesias.
They went through
Rabbi Chadakov, who was the chief secretary. Okay.
By the way, talking about that closeness, if I could put in the story, before the Shloshim, when the Rebbe saw Rabbi Greenglass come into Yechidus, the Shloshim of the Frierdiker Rebbe. That means the first month between Yud Shvat and Yud Adar of Tovshin Yud.
Okay.
in the middle of the Shleishim, my father-in-law came in. The Rebbe greeted him with a big smile. He said, the Rebbe says, I would give you my hand, but I know you won't give me your hand.
Meaning the Rebbe was acknowledging that Yeshver had already accepted him as Rebbe.
But look how the Rebbe is saying it in a smile, in a nice way. I'm ready to give you my hand, but I know you're not going to give me your hand, which shows that closeness that they had.
Okay, but let's not. Okay, so we're in the middle of the story. Is the next morning?
The Rabbi Chadikov is asking, when did it happen?
What time
did it happen?
Okay, because the doctor had just said that you can't save the baby.
It's strange that the Rebbe wants to know, but if the Rebbe wants to know, go back to the doctor. So the doctor found also strange why he wants to know exactly. They told him it happened 4 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
Goes back to the Rebbe, to Rabbi Chadikov. Rabbi Chadikov says that the Rebbe heard that it was 4 o'clock in the morning, and the Rebbe thinks that it wasn't 4 o'clock in the morning. The Rebbe feels that according to his cheshbon, it was 3:30 in the morning.
Okay.
Can you please ask again?
Okay.
So they go back to the doctor. Doctor, could you please verify if it was 4 o'clock or if it was earlier, if it was 3:30 in the morning?
Right. At this point, the
doctor gets annoyed and he says, 1 second, what difference does it make? And why does he have to know?
This was a situation where they didn't even think the baby would be able to make it. And now
you want to know exactly what happened.
Yeah.
So out of courtesy, Rabbi Greenglass was like pleading with him. So he says, okay, I'll find out again. So he goes to the head nurse. He says, tell me, when did it happen?
Right.
Exactly when did it happen? He looks at the notes and she says, I wrote it down at 4 o'clock in the morning. Yes, but when did it happen? It happened at 3:30, but I wrote the note at 4 o'clock. Goes back to the Rebbe and says, yes, it happened at 3:30, but the notes were written at 4 o'clock. And then the Rebbe said, yes, it happened at 3:30 because I wasn't, ich habe sich nicht gekannt, ruhen. I don't know how to translate.
I couldn't rest.
Ruin, more than rest. I couldn't be at peace until I knew that the mother and the baby were all right. And when did the Rebbe feel that the mother and the baby were all right? At 3:30. So it wasn't at 4. To show you that a Rebbe feels chassidim. It's a beautiful message to give
and
to the public.
Doesn't rest until they're in the clear.
Rebbe feels chassidim.
And even more than that, the Rebbe didn't even have to let this be known. So the Rebbe was revealing a little behind the scenes over there.
That was a nice thing about it. Yeah. But the Rebbe feels chassidim. Ask the Rebbe whatever you want through the oil, through his room, through a pan, and he'll find a way to answer.
There's a related story with Yeshver shows how the Rebbe is thinking of chassidim. The story about Maariv.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Rabbi Greenglass had a daughter that unfortunately passed away. She was a special child and handicapped, and she was very not well. Very, very not well, really serious. And they had called doctors and so on. And it was Shabbos, and the Rebbe, and Rabbi Greenglass, whatever he called the Rebbe, he felt already, the Rebbe knows it's okay. So when he called Motzei Shabbos to tell the Rebbe,
meaning they knew about the problem on Shabbos,
and he couldn't call.
He couldn't call until after Shabbos.
And when he called after Shabbos, so the Rebbe said, again, I don't remember the exact words, but something to the effect, don't worry, I had her in mind by davening, and I knew that she would be well. And that's how Motzei Shabbos she made it through. And because it was at one point in the middle of Shabbos that they thought, God forbid, I don't want to say, but unfortunately after that she passed away.
I want to talk a little bit about one of the things about this book is that first of all, it's a very rich biography.
Yeah.
And there's just stories and stories, and just that itself, we gave a taste of Yeshver's incredible life. Okay?
And life in Poland and raising children.
And what life was like, and then Montreal and all of that. There's so much just as a biography, but it's almost like 2 books in one, because there's also Torah.
Yeah.
And you have a Vort, there's sometimes multiple Vertelach on every Parsha and on every Yom Tiv. Okay, so because I know you're running back to Montreal for the Lag Boimer parade, can you give us a little taste, maybe something for Lag Boimer from Yeshver, maybe something from the book that would give us a taste?
So Lag Baimer is in the chapters that talk about the Yamim Tovim of the year, which he would have always. And then there's chapters on the Vetlach of the Parsha of the week. Okay. So you have Parsha Vetlach, and you have Yamim Tovim Vetlach, and then you have Yom Pagra of Shabbos Vetlach. So on Lag Baimer, my father-in-law would say that if you divide the 49 days in two, and
days of Sfira,
the 49 days of Sfira in two, and you make a set of 32 and 17.
Okay, well, so
32 and 17 gives you a total of?
That's 49. Sure.
Well, why 32 and 17?
Yeah.
The gematria of 32 is?
Lev, yeah.
The gematria of 17 is? Tov.
Okay.
Lev Tov means a good heart.
Okay.
What is the purpose of Sfira Saimer? To work on our midas, that we should have a good heart. Rachamana liba, by Hashem demands to see where your heart is. Your heart has to be in the right place. And where is the cross point or the joining point between the 32 and the 17? 33, which is Lag Baimer, which is the difference between the transition of the coarse emotions that have to be dealt with the refined emotions which comes after. Now, Pesach, the korban is So'erim, which is a Meichel Behema and animal food.
Barley, yeah.
Shavuos, it's Shtei Alechem, which is bread, human food. What's the message? That between Pesach and Shavuos, the person has to make a transition from animal tendencies to human refined tendencies. And that's why we shift from animal to human between Pesach and Shavuos.
But you're saying the first 32 is more of the course.
Ahava, Yira.
Right. The more basic stuff.
Right.
And then the fine tuning
is the 17.
Is the 17. So the 32 and the 17, you have Lag Baimer, the 33, right in the middle. That's the...
And it's also the chayes of the whole Sfira Saimer.
I put a little bookmark here because there's a great picture. There are beautiful pictures in this book, but there's a picture here that's connected to Lag Baimer. It's a picture of Yeshver. I don't know if people who aren't from Montreal or who weren't his Talmidim know about this, but there's a picture of him here making a sign
for Lag Baimer
for the parade. Yeah, like he was an artist.
Yes,
and he encouraged his students to use artistic talents.
Yes,
can you tell us a little bit about?
So he would personally get involved, and he felt that Lag Baimer was such a great project to do. Actually, it's one of the Rebbe's cherished projects, the Lag Baimer parade. And he would personally bend over and make a sign. I even remember the sign that he wrote. He wrote in Hebrew, Zachar es yom ha-Shabbos l'katsher. Remember Shabbos to keep it holy.
This was a sign for a float.
It was a sign for a kid to hold. The little kids hold the float.
Uh-huh.
And he personally himself, and he encouraged and he told the Bochurim that you have to do on the Lag Baimer parade, that sometimes a Lag Baimer parade could do what hours of teaching in class will not do.
Being involved in the parade.
Just being proud. What does the parade do? You're parading and being proud of your Shabbos. You're being proud of wearing tefillin. You're being proud of lighting Shabbos candles. You're being proud of eating kosher. When you're in a classroom and you're told to keep Shabbos, you don't have that as when you're parading on it.
Right. Maybe this is connected. We were saying before about the kaida with the moichin.
There you go.
Intellect and emotions.
When emotions are involved, you're in the right way.
By the way, something about this picture, we'll get a close-up of it. In the picture, Yeshver is working on some art here for the parade.
Right.
And very noticeably, for those who remember how he would look most of the time, he's not wearing a hat and jacket.
No. By the way, when it came to eating at the Shabbos table, he would insist that all the children and the grandchildren have to have a hat and jacket at the Shabbos table.
I was told by a friend of mine who was in his Tanya Shiur that by Tanya was always with a hat and jacket.
Yeah, you can't learn Tanya without a hat and jacket.
And that one time it was really, really hot in the summer, and he gave them a one-time exemption to learn Tanya one time with that hat and jacket.
My son Zalmi, who you know.
Yeah, sure.
When he was in camp, so I don't want to mention the name of the camp, but whatever, when it came Shabbos, so they made Kidush, and everybody systematically got up took off their jacket
Right after Kidush.
and put it behind them, and everybody was sitting with their white shirt.
The summer.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
There's camp is in the summer. So if somebody comes into the dining room and sees the dining room, you see a sea of white shirts, right? Everything is white. There was one black jacket with a hat. Who was it? Zalmi.
Because how it is. Zaidi is mechanic.
And then the cows just came over to him and said, Zalmi, make yourself comfortable. Take off your hat and jacket. And he says, no, my Zaidi taught me, Shabbos, you wear a hat and jacket at the table. What does it do? Yeah. It gives you a certain respect for the Shabbos table, and it gives you a certain respect for Tanya when you wear a hat and jacket.
Let's talk about this, because on one hand, we're saying how Yeshver was a Mekubal and he was involved in very, very lofty concepts. But also, as we mentioned, he was into day-to-day hanhaga, customs. So, hat and jacket, very, I would call simple basics, aleph base. There's a lot that his Talmidim especially speak about, and there are thousands of Talmidim all over the world who were influenced by him, that they speak about small, day-to-day, I would call it menschlichkeit, just personal.
And Chasidishkeit, both together.
Give us a taste of some of the guidance that he gave regarding just day-to-day regular things.
By the way, some of them are basic Shulchan Aruch, but it got a little bit swept under the rug. Right. Okay. So number one, he would be very implementing not to talk by Chazar Sashatz. He would go like this. So people got the message, you have to bite your finger, but don't talk. Then he would say for benching, wear your hat and jacket. That means during the weekdays, somebody that doesn't, he would eat with a hat and jacket in the weekdays too. But at least benching every day of the week has to be with a hat and jacket. He said no eating on the street. Because if you eat in the marketplace, in the shopping mall, walking and eating is just like a dog.
I heard he didn't like the water fountain.
Oh, water fountain. He says like this. What is the idea of achila? There's a nitzutz, there's a spark of godliness that you need to drink it. And then when you daven and you learn, you bring up the spark and you elevate the world. So you have to be mekarev it to you. When you bow down and go bring yourself to the water, you're going against the grain. The water has to come to you. And then he said, how does a man drink and how does a behemoth drink? A man brings the cup to his mouth. Yeah. And a behemoth lowers his head to so he didn't like fountains. The yeshiva had a fountain and he didn't like it.
You see there just how you're explaining that there's a spark in the food and you bring it up. That even in these seemingly very simple things, there's this Kabbalistic explanation behind it. And I also want to mention, because when you hear things about this, don't use a water fountain and put on a hat and jacket when you bench, that people can hear this and think of it this as very heavy-handed and very oppressive and harsh. And as we were saying before,
loving.
His style was so gentle.
Loving.
I think especially today, it's important to hear this because, if we could say that there's a picture of an authentic mashpia in Dair Shvi, Yeshver would be that picture in the dictionary. So I want people to understand what a real educator and the Chasidus mashpia, what that means in terms of, we spoke about it before, but I don't think we can speak about it too much. The love and the support and the positivity, like you spoke about, building up a bacher.
Okay.
Speak more about that.
Speak more about that. When an adult comes to a teenager is an unfinished product, and he doesn't know how he's going to end up. He sees married people. This one became a rabbi. This one became a shliach. This one became a doctor. This one became a lawyer. This one became a successful businessman. This one became a businessman that's not making a living. He doesn't know how he's going to end up. So there's a lot of insecurity inside the book. Uncertainty. When Rabbi Greenglass came over to the bacher, he came with love and told him, it's not all up to you. There's a Shem that has a master plan, and you just make yourself the keli that his master plan will be successful with you. When people would
Sort
ask
of takes
him
the pressure off.
a lot, and when people would ask him, Reb Volf, was macht ihr? So he would say, Der Eberste macht, mir dürfen sie nicht zu Kalle machen.
All right. Hashem is the one who makes things. We just have to not
We
mess
have
it
to
up.
we have to be the good recipients for doing everything.
This goes back to the original story that you started with. We spoke about Ratzon Elyon.
Right.
There's certain things. This is just what Hashem has in mind, and however much we can understand, that it's neither here nor there. This is the Ratzon Elyon. And then there are things that are up to us. Hakol b'dei shemaim chutz mi Yerushalayim,
Right.
sort of.
You take care of your Yerushalayim. You make a keli. He used to say that Shnayim Mikra ve'echad Targum, that you're supposed to go over the parsha before Shabbos, and at the latest before your chant, and in the worst case scenario, Matzah Shabbos, you have to do the parsha 2 times the pasuk, 1 time the Targum. That's the kelim for the bracha of the whole week. My shver was at home towards the end. He was living in our house, so he would get ready. He wasn't allowed to take the strong mashka, so we would prepare him the liqueurs, the sweet liqueurs. It was a little later on the system, so I would prepare it for him, and I say, "No, Zayda Leben." I used to call him Zayda Leben. It's like a Yiddish expression for Zayda, my heart. Zayda Leben, was gehst du Farbrenging? Heint, what are you Farbrenging today? He says, I'm going to tell them to do their Chitas. I'm going to tell them to daven with the minyan, to daven well. I'm going to tell them to go to sleep on time so that they should wake up on time and be on time for Chasidus. Right. I said, basics. But that's basic. Yeah, but I'm going to give a few stories to encourage that to happen.
By the way, you mentioned the Chitas.
Yes,
it's
very much in Chitas.
Vort from Yeshver, but the Chitas from Yud Shvat.
So in the Tanya portion of the Chitas,
for that day
of Yud Shvat, it's me'ayin leyesh tomid.
Those are I think those are the last words of that.
Right. Day. And ayin is Yud Aleph Nissen.
Right.
And yesh is Yud Shvat, to show the connection on the day of Yud Shvat.
Right. From
Rebbe to
Nissen,
Rebbe.
from the Rebbe's birthday to Yud Shvat, the Rebbe's Kabbalas Nissen. Yeah.
And from the Frierdiker Rebbe to the Rebbe, the passing of the.
Just a little bit more about the Frierdiker Rebbe's connection to Yeshver. Maybe I heard it from you, but there's a letter.
Yes.
A very unique. I mean, there's one word that's unique.
Yes.
The Frierdiker Rebbe refers to Yeshver,
Beni,
my son.
Which, according to Rabbi Mangel, I mean, I'm not an expert on all the letters that the Frierdiker Rebbe ever gave out, but I'm repeating what Rabbi Mangel said, that to the best of his knowledge, there's no letter in the whole world that the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote to someone with the title Beni, my son. And that happened when my father-in-law was starting to work in Sofris and asked the Rebbe for a bracha, and the Rebbe titles him Beni. And he signs Ohavecha, that loves you.
I think this also reinforces that idea that
I don't know if the camera could zoom into this small words.
Yeah, we'll get a closer shot of it.
Right here. El Beni, Achoshu,
yeah.
And at the bottom, Ohavecha, who loves you.
Like you were saying before, that he lost his family, he was a refugee, and like you were saying, how the Frierdiker Rebbe taught these boys how to have a Shabbos table, and he made them family.
Like Beni, he calls him my son.
Yeah.
In one letter, he says Talmidi. But Talmidi, you see there's more times that the Frierdiker Rebbe said Talmidi.
Yeah.
You asked me for some examples. Rabbi Greenglass would not like when people held food with 2 hands. Like, let's say a sandwich,
big hamburger.
like this.
Yeah.
So he says, there's only 2 times a year that a Yid holds food with 2 hands.
Okay.
The 2 times a year is mitzvah of matzah, which Chasidus says that's achila v'elekus. It's pashat elekus that gives emunah to the body. And the achila of the sudas hamafseket before Yom Kippur. Those are the 2 times that you could hold food with 2 hands. Otherwise, it's not appropriate. When you want to take cake and dip it into the coffee, the Bochurim would take.
Sure.
So he said, "Go wash your hands like tapas."
Right, without a bracha.
Without a bracha, exactly.
Right. If you're going to dip.
he would also say when people were too serious, you have to crack a joke. He doesn't like when people are too serious. You have to crack. He used to always crack.
Give us a joke.
A joke that he would say.
Yeah. So people get a flavor with this type of humor.
So if somebody would go to if one of the kids would go to the fridge to open the fridge to take a snack, they say, "Oh, vahi bin sayarin." So, and if he was at the table and he wanted that you should pass him a salad, so it's interesting. He would connect it always with Torah. So he would say, Basia, when she went to the Nile to get Moshe, she couldn't get Moshe. So Vatishlach esamasa, Hashem made a miracle that
her arm extended.
Arm extended. The Gemara in Megillah says different extensions according to the Tanya, how much they felt the arm extended, like to a ridiculous amount, like a very, very long amount. And actually, the Rebbe brings it down in a sikha and says, from this we learn that when somebody wants to do something good, Hashem will help them do it.
Even if it seems it's out of your reach.
Hashem will help you do it.
Yeah.
So he would bring that out. He would say, could you please pass me the salad that's on the other side of the table? I don't have the hand of Basya Bas Parak. So all of a sudden, passing a salad became a Dvar Torah.
And a joke. Right, all in one.
Right. What else would he say? He would say I told you about the mikveh. Was the water cold and or was it hot? There was sometimes when a person didn't put on Rabbeinu Tam, he would actually go over to them just before the shkia and tell them, "Did you put on Rabbeinu Tam today?" And he said, "Oh, I forgot." So he said, "Oh, you see, I remember to remind you." Like I don't know, he had ESP. I don't know what he had. Mm-hmm. He had something. He also held that when you wash before bread, you should wash how the Rebbe washes. There's videos of the Rebbe washing on the Sukkot on Chol Hamoed. Mm-hmm. You could actually see the Rebbe would hold with a towel, fill up with the right hand, pass to the left hand, and the water should go after the wrist. And some Bochurim, they barely go to the knuckles, or if you're lucky, a little over the knuckles, but it doesn't go over the wrist. Right. So he would go to the Bochurim and say, "You have to wash." But all these little things make a person into a Chasidus Shiur. It's little details, but that's what it makes. That makes the difference.
Okay, I know you have to get back to the Lag BaOmer parade preparations in Montreal. So before we wrap up, how about one more Vort you can pick from the book, a Vort, whether it's Lag BaOmer or it's Parsha or something, but a Torah teaching from Rabbi Greenglass, and then a story. You could tell any story you want, but I have a request for the story, which I'll tell you in a minute, which story I would like to hear about. Okay, but first, a Dvar Torah from the book.
A Dvar Torah from the book. It's a word from the Frierdiker Rebbe that my Shver would always say by Yom Tov. Mipnei chatoenu galinu me'atzenu v'nisrachaknu me'al admoseinu. Right?
Because of our sins, we're exiled from our
translation, lands. Because of our sins, we have been exiled from our land, and we have been sent out from our land. Again, admoseinu, atzenu, our country, our land. So watch the words. Beautiful, very beautiful, from the Frierdiker Rebbe. Mipnei chatosenu, because of our sins. Galinu, we have been exiled. Me'artzenu, from our Ratzon Elyon that's inside of us. Our will to serve Hashem now is compromised. Yeah. Before, I wanted to do the will of Hashem with a lot of devotion. Right. Now my sins weakened it and holds me back and damped it a little bit. I don't want to do the will of Hashem as much as I wanted before because I'm hampered by I'm handicapped by my sins.
It's a vicious cycle. The person starts to drift and then he loses.
Avera. Okay. What's the next phrase? And we're furthering ourselves away from the tzura of Adam.
Right. Adam. Yeah.
Adam. Right. We no longer have the face of a man. We're getting closer to the animal world.
Right. Right.
And we cannot longer do our responsibility how we should. Basically, the pasuk is saying our sins handicap us. So we have to get rid of our sins. We have to do tshuva.
Okay, now I told you, and there are, like I mentioned, there are divrei Torah on every parsha, on every Yom Tov. There's
one small word comes to mind.
Okay, no problem.
Sorry.
Okay, no.
Just Rabbi Greenglass would notice the Bochurim when they finished davening, younger light also, married men too, when it's at the end of the davening, and they're saying Aleinu words, they take their ritzua and they whip it off, and some go even like this. You know I'm sure you've seen that. You know what I'm talking about, especially when somebody's in a rush. He couldn't take that. He couldn't take it. It was bothering him. So once by Farbrenging, he said like this. I remember hearing it from him. It says once that Tzemach Tzedek finished davening, and he took his tefillin and started wrapping them up after his tefillin, and he was looking at them and cherishing them and kissing them and saying and singing a niggin and like parting from a good friend. Like you want to say goodbye to a good friend. And a chassid was passing by. He was going to go on. He stopped. He saw the Tzemach Tzedek wrapping his tefillin. He watched him and he saw wrapping and kissing them and singing a niggin. And it was such a beautiful sight to see. The chassid then went to daven. And with what emotions and enthusiasm did he daven? With how the Tzemach Tzedek wrapped his tefillin and putting away,
not putting wrapping it on his arm. He's saying when wrapping it up to
in
put
the
it
box
away,
to put it away.
In the box, yeah.
So when he said that to the Bochurim, he said, when you take away your tefillin, you're basically a transition from a time of davening to getting into the world. That transition has to be with love, with tefillin, with kissing the tefillin. And when you kiss the tefillin and sing a little niggin and feel that you're parting away from something holy and precious, your day will be a Chasidus Shiur day. So there's some Bochurim today and some young light today that tell me that they put away their tefillin properly from Rabbi Greenglass's instructions. But whoever didn't get Rabbi Greenglass's instruction might go like this and pull it off. And this book will remind them how to do it.
That's right. That's right. So how many more people will now become Talmidim of Rabbi Greenglass through this? What you did, you took his way of relating to his students, and now it's virtually, I guess, available through. Okay, so can we finish with a story? This is the story I want to know, and then you could tell that, and if you want, you could throw in another one.
Sure.
Okay. I actually don't know the story, but it's a famous shmua. It's a rumor, and I guess I want to confirm from you whether or not there's any substance to the rumor. They say that it was Kiddush Levana and it was cloudy. I heard different versions of the story, and I would like to know if there's any, before I tell the version that I heard, is there substance to any of this?
Okay, so a lot of people say that Rabbi Greenglass once was by Kiddush Levana, and there were clouds hiding the moon, and he took out his handkerchief and went like that, and the clouds parted, and they could make Kiddush Levana. And the way I heard the story is that the Rebbe was upset about it. That's what I heard. So I always was uncomfortable about asking him. And one day I took the courage and I went over to him and I said, listen, people are telling me about this story. Is it true? People tell a lot of stories. Don't believe everybody. Don't believe everything everybody says. Mm-hmm. I was once in Toronto.
Okay.
And I was Shabbos in Shul, and somebody came over to me and says, you see that man over there? He was with your father-in-law. There was an older man with a gray beard. When Rabbi Greenglass took his handkerchief and pushed away, I ran over to him. I said, are you an eyewitness of this story? He says, yes. Mm-hmm. I said, could you tell me how it happened? He says, sure. There was like this, like this, like this. And Rabbi Greenglass took out his handkerchief and moved away the clouds. I said, it's Shabbos. I want to record you. Can I call you tonight? He says, sure. Okay. After Shabbos, after Havdalah, I called him and I recorded him, and I have it recorded. Yes, the story is true. I heard it from an eyewitness. With his handkerchief, he went like this, and the clouds moved away. I think the story originally happened with Reb Meir Pamishlan.
Yeah. And the Rebbe actually told the story. I think there was a story in front of 770 where it was cloudy.
By the way, it also goes to show us how, with a small stroke of our hand, a Jew doesn't realize how much it has an effect on the whole universe, in the whole globe, in the whole.
Maybe this
system.
is a theme of this conversation we're having: is the small things, the little things, the everyday, but it all is connected to the deep, spiritual, lofty, Kabbalistic stuff in the higher realms. I think that's sort of a theme here.
You asked a nice little word. Tzohar. Noach was asked to put a tzohar in the middle of the teva.
Right.
So Rashi says there's two opinions what the tzohar was.
Right.
One says it was a diamond that was radiating light, and one opinion says that it was a window. But whichever way you look at it, it's a positive thing. A window brings light, and a diamond radiates light. So the same letters, tzohar, also spell out tzara, which is
pain,
something that is bad, a bad event. And the same letters, tzohar, tzadik hey resh, and tzadik resh hey, also spell ratza, which is a will.
Right.
So I believe it's a word from the Baal Shem Tov. I'm not 100% sure. But in the book, it's written that when a person is in a state of having a tzara, chas v'sholom, which is something negative, ratza, with the willpower, he's able to change the tzara into a tzohar, a diamond, and a window. So again, it teaches us positivity, always moving forward. He used to say, tomorrow has to be better than today. What if today was worse than yesterday? But tomorrow will be better than today.
Always positive. And for someone who went through so much,
that's the way he went through it.
Yeah. I think we can all learn from that. And less people say, how can we aspire to this level to be such a holy person? But I think the point you're making is that he very much did bring up others to his level and to show them how it's done, really, to give them the methodology of how to live on this level. Just to bring things together, can you give us like one more story? Just one more story. Yeah, and then we'll wrap it up here.
Rebbetzin Rivka once heard that it's brought down in Chasidus many times that inside every material object there's a Dvar Hashem.
Okay.
This
is a story that Yeshver used to tell.
Yes.
It's a story he used to tell. Okay.
Yeah.
So not a story about him, but a story that he would tell often.
Yes.
Interesting. You started our conversation with a story he used to tell often about Rebbetzin Rivka.
Yeah, he brought.
Do you know why?
Well, Rebbetzin Rivka was a very big stature of the Rebbe, from all the Rebbetzins. It's not for nothing that the Meisters Chabad is called Beis Rivka after her. She heard a lot of stories from the Rebbetzin of the Mittler Rebbe, and she used to have a book that she wrote down all these stories. And when the Rebbe Rashab would go out of town, the Rebbetzin Rivka would be mechanech the Frierdiker Rebbe and tell all these stories over.
Right. The Frierdiker Rebbe, who recorded so many of the stories of Chabad history, credits his grandmother with being his source for so many of these stories. Okay, so a story about the Rebbetzin Rivka that Yeshver used to tell. Okay.
Yeah, so Rebbetzin Rivka would say that it says in Chasidus that in every physical object is a Dvar Hashem. Ilo nitin reshus la'ayin lireis.
Right.
If it was given the ability for the eye to see, then you would actually not see the physical object, but you would see complete bittul and only Hashem.
Right.
As a matter of fact, it says that 3 days before the Alter Rebbe passed away, he saw on the beam of the home that was on the ceiling, he says he saw the Dvar Havaya that was giving chayas to the beam. Okay?
Like it explains in the Shara Yichud Ve'emunah that everything is letters, divine speech. Yeah.
And that it's amazing how there's so much Helim that we feel that there's a world, but really everything is Hashem. Right. So we have the understanding that we cannot see it. So she said, Rabbi Rivka said, you cannot see it without avodah. But if you do avodah, if you work on yourself, you could see it. I found that amazing. Like you asked me, like what?
He wasn't telling the story to explain the level of Rebbe Rivka.
No,
he was telling the story
to give us access to the Maila, the advantage of doing avodah. As a matter of fact, there's a mimer from the Rebbe, Kadeshim Tiyu. It's a small word. So there's Kodesh with Avav and Kodesh without Avav. Kodesh with Avav means that the Kidush is coming down to us. Right. Kodesh without Avav is the Kidush is higher than us. Okay?
Transcendent, yeah.
Okay. So now, we have a little bit of a contradiction. On one hand, it says, Kidushasi lemayla mikdushaschem. You'll never reach my Kedusha. Right. On the
Hashem
other
says to us, you'll never reach my Kedusha.
On the other hand, it says, Kadeshim Tiyu, be Kodesh.
Right.
And when it says, Kadeshim Tiyu, you should be Kodesh, it says it when you have to be Kodesh without a Vav. So if it's without a Vav, hey, hold on, we can't reach your Kedusha. Says the Rebbe Maimer. And it's basically the same point, the same Nekuda, if you pick up your antennas to get it. Yes, you could never be on the Kedusha of Hashem. Kedushasi lemayla mikdushaschem. But if you do Kaddish Esatzmecha b'mutalach, if you do Avodah, you could get to the level of Hashem. You could get to the level of the Kedusha of Hashem. So if you just break yourself and not do what you want to do, or wait a little bit before you want to do it, I remember by Farbrenging, I wanted a piece of gefilte fish. I take my fork and I go like this, and an older chassid goes, "Where's Iskafia?" I felt embarrassed. I put down my fork. 5 minutes later, he gives me the fork, says, "Okay, now you can have it."
The same guy who.
Yeah. In other words,
like now it's okay. Yeah.
When you do Kaddish Esatzmecha b'mutalach, you open yourself to be a keli for the Kedusha of Hashem. Even though it says Kedushasi lemayla mikdushaschem. So it's the same thing. Tanya says, Ilu nitul nishus la'ayin lirais. That means we don't have access to seeing the greatness of Einoid Milvade. But the Rebbe Rivka says, with Avodah, you do.
You could.
And the Rebbe says in the Maimer of Kadeshim Tiyu, with Kaddish Esatzmecha b'mutalach, you could. So what are you getting from this? What's the Nekuda?
You're asking?
Yes.
I'm hearing a message that I think is incredibly important for this time that we live in, where I'm just saying an inside crowd here. I'm not speaking to the masses, but I'm saying Lubavitch, people who learn Chasidus, people who follow in the ways of the Rebbe. I think there's like a discussion today about, how much of this is still applicable. Who can really do this? Who's on the level? Is it beyond us? And really the point that you're making as you tell the story of your Shver's life and his teachings and the style of hashpah that he had, it's very clear that it's the highest of the high, but it's the most simple, practical, accessible at the very same time. Which is, by the way, also what the Rebbe says is the lesson of Lag B'omer. Lag B'omer is also the highest of the high and just also regular parade. Yeah. Yeah. And that we can be holy. I think that's really the message, that we're regular people on one hand, but we can be holy. We can lift ourselves up to that level.
Rabbi Nissen Nemenov once went into Chitas and asked the Rebbe, I would like to ask the Rebbe if the Indian of Iskafia is still shaykh today with Bochurim. And the Rebbe said yes.
Since we got the whole other discussion, I thought we were finished before, but you're bringing up Iskafia, which for some people is a trigger word because it feels like it's deprivation, it's oppressive. Well, how did your Shver teach Iskafia, which I'll call like self-control, self-discipline? How did you teach it in his gentle, loving way with the Bochurim specifically?
Beautiful question. Beautiful question.
I see that we could do this all day, by the way. You have a parade to go run. Okay, this will be the last chapter of our Farbrenging over.
Okay.
How did he teach Iskafia for regular Bochurim in yeshiva?
Okay, let me handpick the words to bring out the concept as beautiful as possible with Hashem's help. Inside every one of us is a monster. The monster grows when you give into it. The monster contracts and becomes smaller when you don't give into it.
And you're using your own words here.
Right. But
how would you shver?
My shver would say, you have to condition yourself not to do what you want, and then you will have full control in your life. The minute you don't control yourself, you open yourself to disaster. And he was always saying, man darf sich einhalten, man darf sich zurückhalten. By the way, it doesn't mean all the time Iskafia that you don't do it at all. Mm-hmm. Postponing it is also Iskafia.
Right.
But for example, I once asked Rabbi Fegelstecher, who was very close with my father and I lived with him many years when he was a bacher, what could you tell me about Rabbi Greenglass? And he said to me, I never met a man in my life that was in control of machshava, dibur, and maisa. Nobody that I met, like your father-in-law, that he was in control. So when I mean in control, I don't mean it in a negative way. I mean that he did what he wanted to do, but not what he was tempted to do or what he had a tendency to do. He was in full control of what he really wanted to do.
A real Baal Bechira. He had free choice.
And how do you do that? By not giving in to what you want.
This goes back to the original story you told about the Rebbe and Rivka crying, getting the letter from the Razah's daughters or about the Razah's daughters, about the difference between, there's certain things that's Ratzana Elyain, and that is what it is. And then there's the person's Ratzin, your will. And that's where you actually have to make a choice. And that's where we have to put your effort. This is the theme you're bringing out about really being a balabayas, being the owner of your own behaviors. And
parents think today that if you give in to your children, you love them. It's not always giving in to the children that is love. Sometimes holding back something from your children is the true love. They have to know what it feels like that you don't always get what you want. One day they'll get married and their wife may not be giving them exactly everything they want. So they have to want what is good and what's the right thing to do, but not always want what they want. They have to want the right thing. That's what I started saying about the monster. If I'm calling it a monster, but it's the Yetzer Hara, whatever, the evil inclination, call it what you want. You give into it, it grows. You give into it, it grows. You give into it, it grows. The next time you want, it's harder to hold back because you got it used to giving. But if you don't give into it, it gets smaller. It gets smaller. And then when you want something, it goes through there's a divine moment of making a decision if it's the right thing to do or not. And when you decide always on an impulse and you're always giving, it's hard to have that divine moment to make the right decision.
This is the part I think that people really want to hear is you spoke about, the monster can get smaller, but the more you exercise self-control and you think about what you're going to do before you do it, then the more manageable the conflict becomes. In my experience, I really think this is something that's misunderstood, and it's a missing piece of the puzzle for a lot of us. And there are so few, like your shver, who can convey this clearly and honestly, but also lovingly in a non-threatening way. I don't know if I'm asking too much here, but how would Yeshua answer if I would say, how do you inspire today's Bach? If I could ask him right now, how can I talk to a Bach of 2024 to give him the self-confidence, the hope of becoming a true master of himself? What would he say? What would be his message?
So the first thing that he would ask of him, like I said before, and he would tell the Bochurim that the 7 years between the age of 13 and 21 are 7.
That's 8, by the way.
It depends how you count. But whatever.
Okay. All right.
When you're 13, you go into the 14th year. Whatever.
Okay. All right.
But 7 years. So those are the Sheva Shnei Saseva, the 7 years in the dream of Pare that are going to sustain the years of famine. Okay. Not that marriage is a year of famine, but
you have
it's
other
giving the
responsibilities,
idea, getting
right.
into the world
Right.
and to the world of work and the workforce and all, and paying bills and getting a flat tire and NSF checks. The whole world with all its challenges.
Yeah. So
those 7 years are the years of sustenance. You have to build your library of learning Chasidus by heart.
Right, mention having a mimer.
Once you have that, it's so much easier then to ask of Iskafia. Because if you just do Iskafia, but you don't have the whole picture behind you with learning by heart and Farbrenging with boys and Farbrenging with Mashpiyim and learning and having the time of learning in Halacha and that time of learning in Talmud and a time of learning in Chasidus. It just, when you go to a Bach and you tell them, okay, you know what? You want to be a Chassid, do Iskafia. Right. It comes with a whole picture. When the Iskafia comes, it doesn't have to come with like an avalanche. Yeah. For example, I think the Frierdiker Rebbe told my father-in-law, when in the summer it's hot and you want a cold drink, Iskafia would be to take a hot tea. And the Gemara says that a hot tea will cool down the body faster than a cold drink. Because the heat of the hot tea will overheat the body and the body will perspire. And then the body is actually cooled down.
It's actually more helpful also.
Yeah, but my father-in-law told me this from the Frierdiker Rebbe that the Frierdiker Rebbe told him. So having a hot tea is not a terrible thing to have.
Right. It's not torture. Right.
It's not torture. Yeah. No, you want a Coke? Fine, take a Coke. You want to do Iskafia on the Coke? Do it 5 minutes after you want.
Okay.
Don't do it that minute.
Don't put in ice.
What are you? Oh, you can put in the ice 5 minutes later. But what are you gaining from that postponing? What are you gaining? That you will not do something on an impulse. And that what you gain that you don't do on an impulse is a tremendous virtue. And it has so much value because next time somebody says a remark that you want to answer back nasty, the conditioning of yourself to always think that I first have to stop before I do something will make you stop and think, and it'll make you a chassid and a mensch, and you'll be a beautiful human being.
This is really, really, really needed stuff today. This message of becoming less reactive, becoming more in self-control. This is so needed today. And I'm so glad that this book exists now because I think Yeshver's whole style and his worldview, his outlook, all these things that you're talking about, just being more in control and being less reactive and being more emotionally grounded. And it's so, so needed today. And it's like a lost art to have access to someone who mastered not only living it, but transmitting it is so invaluable.
My shver would be very much telling fathers to spend time with their children. Like it says in Hayom Yom that a half hour a day you should put on chinuch, to go out with your son, to go out with your daughter, and not necessarily to preach Torah, just to...
This is something you heard from him?
Yes. Just to be...
This, by the way, itself can be worth the entire discussion we're having.
Why?
Because
there were so many other things that we said that were nice.
But this, to me, I've just personally, I've seen the idea that part of giving your child a true Chasidische chinuch is Pashat spending time with them.
100%.
And not necessarily...
It's
okay, but there it says to spend a half an hour. It could mean you go and think about the education of your child. Doesn't mean spending time with them necessarily. Tell me, in Yeshver's words, as best you can, what he gave as simple guidance to parents, and then we'll finish with this, I think.
To go out with the child for a walk.
This is something you heard from him.
Yes.
Take a walk with your child.
No distraction. Spend time with them. Ask them what they're doing, what they want to do, what could, just let them talk. You don't have to talk. Let them talk.
You heard this from him?
Yes, that the children should feel they have a father to talk to, a mother to talk to. Just open the areas of communication.
You don't have to preach. You don't have to teach them anything. Take a walk, just and listen. Bond, spend time with them. Can you tell, for all the thousands of Talmidim of Yeshiva all over the world, and those who are becoming his Talmidim right now, can you just give us this message? To me, this is gold. This message, tell them clearly that the Mashpia, the Mekubal, the Rebbe's Mekubal, Reb Greenglass said, take a walk with your kid and let them talk. Tell us, just.
Rabbi Greenglass wanted that every parent should have a healthy communication with their child. The way to have a healthy communication with your child is not always by preaching. Preaching could sometimes distance the child. The preaching has to be in a wise way, not necessarily by saying something, but by being an example. When my daughters were growing up, there was a lot of things going on in high school, which was not Chasidus, not the high school's fault, but just the golos that we live in. And I went over to my father-in-law and I said, Zayti, how could I ensure that my daughters will be Chasidus? I'm scared. I really am scared. And he looked at me in the eyes and he said, you be Chasidus and be an example to them and they will follow in your ways. By Matan Torah, it says, Reim es anishma. What does it mean that they saw what they heard? It means that the teacher, the parent, the educator, the mashpia, when they say something, so the children hear it, shaimim. But the children have to be roim es anishma. They have to see the educator.
That which they're hearing from their parent or teacher, they have to see him doing it.
You have to be a living example, and you yourself have to go to Farbrenging to bring yourself to the level that you challenge yourself to grow, and the children will see that passion and follow in the same way.
If I could just put out a plug for the book, if you're a parent and you want a Farbrenging, so maybe you do or you don't have access to a Farbrenging, but this book is a Farbrenging, and personally, I'll share how I'm starting to use the book is you can open up the section of Divrei Torah and you have Lag B'Omer coming up, you have Pesach Sheni coming up, you get a Vort from Reb Greenglass on the Parsha, on the upcoming Yom Tov, and you have a Farbrenging there, and then you have what the Farbrenging with your kids about. You take that to the family.
It's online, by the way, rebvolf.com, REBVOLF.
Oh, thank you.
.com.
Okay, REB, Reb Volf, VOLF. .com. And you can get the book over there.
And it'll be shipped to you.
Baruch Hashem. Rabbi Cohen.
Rabbi Shais Taub, I want to thank you because you know what? In the middle of this interchange, you got me into the feeling as if I was talking to my father-in-law. Because everything like the feelings of.
And my hope is that the people watching this are going to also feel like they were able to spend some time with him.
You got me in that state of mind that I wasn't there for a long time. Through
Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem. Thank you for making time for us over here.
Pleasure.
I'm sure it will benefit many, many, many people, and it should be a schus for Yeshva's neshama.
Amen. And for all of Israel, we should be zeicher to Mashiach now.
Amen. Amen. Shkaya.